41 years of getting up before the alarm. That's what I built my retirement on. 41 years of pre-dawn coffee, highway commutes, quarterly reports, and the particular exhaustion that comes from caring deeply about things that ultimately don't care about you back. When I finally walked out of Hensley Manufacturing for the last time, I didn't throw a party. I drove home, sat on the back porch of the house Elaine and I had owned for 22 years, and listened to absolutely nothing. It was a Tuesday in March. The yard was still dead from winter. It was the best sound I'd ever heard. Elaine and I had a plan. We'd been building it quietly for 6 years, the way you build things when you're serious about them. A property in Harlan County, Kentucky. Not a farm, not quite. 11 acres with a creek running the back edge, a main house with a covered porch, and a detached workshop I intended to fill with woodworking equipment. We'd found it through a listing that had been sitting for 2 years, drove out one cold November Saturday, walked the property with the realtor in mud boots, and both knew by the time we got back to the car. We didn't say it out loud until we were 20 minutes down the road. Then Elaine said, "That's it, isn't it?" I said, "Yeah." We closed 6 months later. The workshop alone made the whole thing worth it. I'd been woodworking as a hobby since my 30s, picking it up in stolen weekends, never with enough time to get serious. Now I had time. I had 11 acres, a creek, a covered porch, and a workshop with proper dust collection. For 14 months, it was everything we'd saved for. More, honestly. There's a particular quality of quiet in rural Kentucky that you don't find anywhere else. In the mornings before Elaine was up, I'd take my coffee out to the porch and just sit with it. Sometimes a deer would come through the edge of the tree line. Sometimes nothing would happen at all. Both were fine. I didn't know it then, but something was already forming just outside my line of sight. The way weather systems do, out past the horizon, still invisible but building. Welcome to Dad's Calm Revenge. Grab your coffee, get comfortable, and understand that the people in this story thought they were dealing with a tired old man who'd gone soft in retirement. They were wrong. Hit subscribe so you don't miss what comes next. Our daughter Margot had married a man named Travis 3 years earlier. I want to be fair to Travis, so let me say this carefully. He is not a bad person. He's not cruel, not mean-spirited, not someone I'd warn a stranger about in a parking lot. What Travis is, and I say this having observed him closely for 3 years, is a man who has never once in his life had an idea that didn't immediately become someone else's problem to implement. He presents plans the way a contractor presents invoices, as things that have already happened, requiring only your signature. Elaine called it decisive. I called it something that starts with a different letter. Travis worked in commercial lending, made decent money. They lived about an hour from us in Lexington, in a nice colonial, in a neighborhood where everyone had the same mailbox. They had a daughter, our granddaughter Piper, who was 3 years old and the one irreplaceable thing in this entire story. Now, before I go further, I want to address something directly, because if you've watched enough of these stories, you know what the comments say. Someone is going to ask why I didn't just say no from the beginning. It's a fair question. The honest answer is this. Travis came to me with Margot sitting right there. Margot, who I have loved every day of her life, who I was not going to put in the middle of something ugly if I could find a smarter way through it. That's not weakness. That's choosing your battlefield. I'd spent 41 years in manufacturing. I knew the difference. Travis's mother was named Gloria. His father was named Hank. They lived in Pikeville, about 2.5 hours east of us, in a house they'd owned for 30 years. Hank had worked in coal infrastructure most of his life, done well enough, but the region had gone through what the region had gone through, and his pension had been restructured twice in ways that left it significantly smaller than what he'd been promised. They were not destitute, but they were not comfortable either, and Gloria, I would learn, had a relationship with other people's square footage that I can only describe as acquisitive. They came to Sunday dinner in late April. Elaine had made a pot roast, the one with the carrots and the small potatoes that takes all day and fills the whole house. We ate on the porch, because the evening was perfect. Piper chased a moth through the yard until it disappeared into the tree line. It was the kind of evening that makes you feel like you did something right with your life. That's when Travis set down his fork and said, "So we've been wanting to talk to you two about something." I have never in my life heard a sentence start that way and end well. "Sure," Elaine said. He leaned forward, both forearms on the table. "My parents. Things have been tight since the pension situation." I did know. He'd mentioned it in passing twice before. I'd filed it away the same way you file away a weather forecast. "You can't do anything about. We were thinking," he said, "just temporarily, just while they get back on their feet, they could come stay here, in the main house. You've got the room." We did have the room. 3 bedrooms, 2 of them largely unused since it was just Elaine and me. That was not the point. The porch went quiet. Somewhere out past the tree line a whippoorwill started up. I thought, yeah, that's about right. "Temporarily," I said. 4 months, maybe 5. Just until Hank's back situation stabilizes and they can figure out next steps. I looked at Elaine. She looked at me. Margot was studying the tablecloth like it contained information she urgently needed. "Let us think about it," Elaine said. Travis smiled. He smiled before she'd finished the sentence. It was a small thing. I noted it the way I note small things, quietly, completely, without letting it show. The following 2 weeks were what I'd call a managed pressure campaign. Travis texted, Margot called. Gloria, who had spoken to me exactly 4 times in 3 years of being related, left me a voicemail describing Hank's back pain in clinical detail and closing with, "We just need somewhere safe to land, Gerald. My name is not Gerald. My name is Curtis." I don't know if she knew that and didn't care, or simply hadn't bothered to learn it. Both options told me something. Elaine softened. I watched it happen the same way I watched the creek rise after heavy rain, gradually, then all at once. She started saying things like, "It would only be a few months, and Piper would love having everyone closer." "She's a good woman, Elaine. Her instinct is always toward, yes. It's one of the things I love about her, and occasionally the thing that requires me to be the one who thinks twice." I didn't commit. I listened. I nodded. I made no promises. Then Travis came out on a Thursday, alone. No Margot. Just Travis with that lending officer posture sitting at my kitchen table like he was about to walk me through a rate sheet. "I get the sense there's some hesitation," he said. "Sharp instincts," I said. He didn't flinch. "Look, I understand this is your space. But you've got a 3-bedroom house and 2 people. My parents need somewhere quiet, somewhere with room. The math makes sense." I looked at him for a moment. "Travis," I said, "the math isn't the problem. Then what is?" "Nobody asked me," I said. "Not properly. You presented this the way you present everything. Like the decision was made somewhere upstream and I just haven't been informed yet." Something moved behind his eyes. A slight recalibration. "That's not. And your mother called me Gerald." He had the decency to look uncomfortable. "She does that sometimes." "With people she knows well?" A pause. "I'll talk to her." Then he said something I want you to hear clearly, because it's the sentence that moved me from cautious to deliberate. He said, "Curtis, I have to be honest with you. Margot is really struggling with the stress of this situation. And when Margot is stressed, it affects our marriage. And when our marriage is affected, Piper feels it." I heard every word. I heard the architecture of it. He had just used my daughter's anxiety and my granddaughter's stability as instruments of persuasion, arranged them carefully, like tools on a workbench, and set them in front of me. I smiled. "Let me talk to Elaine," I said. He left looking satisfied. I stood at the window and watched his truck disappear around the bend in the long gravel driveway. Then I went to the workshop, sat down on the stool I keep by the lathe, and made a decision that I have not once second-guessed. I said yes, but first I made a phone call. My friend Dennis had retired from the sheriff's department after 26 years and gone into security consulting. Private clients mostly. He'd installed systems in 3 properties I knew of personally, including the bed and breakfast his sister ran in Berea. I called him that evening. "I need a system," I said. "Good one. Indoor and outdoor. Audio capable." "What's the situation?" "Family coming to stay." "I want documentation." There was a pause. Then, "Kentucky's a one-party consent state for recording, Curtis. Long as you're present on the property, or it's your residence, you're covered." "I know. I already looked it up." He laughed. It wasn't a short laugh. "When do you need it done?" Dennis came out the following Saturday with a colleague. They installed 8 cameras total. Front door, main living area, kitchen, back porch, the workshop exterior, the long driveway, one covering the detached garage, and one at the corner of the house where the backyard opened up toward the creek. All motion activated, all with audio, all feeding to an encrypted cloud server and an app on my phone. After they left, I moved our important documents, Elaine's jewelry, and a few things with sentimental value into the gun safe in the master closet, which already had a keypad. Then I moved the safe itself into the corner and bolted it to the floor studs. Elaine watched me do this. "You're being paranoid," she said. "Probably," I said. I didn't mention the cameras. Not because I was keeping something from Elaine, I don't do that, but because I needed everyone in the house to behave naturally. If Elaine knew, she would be careful, and careful would be visible. I needed the cameras to catch what people did when they thought no one was watching. Gloria and Hank arrived on a Wednesday. Hank got out of the truck slowly, one hand on the doorframe, and I felt a genuine flicker of sympathy. His back was real. He moved like a man negotiating with his own skeleton. He shook my hand and said, "Curtis, we appreciate this more than I can say." His handshake was firm and brief, the handshake of a man who means what he says and doesn't need to elaborate. I could work with Hank. Gloria stepped out and looked at the property the way a buyer looks at a listing, taking inventory. Her eyes went to the covered porch, the workshop, the detached garage. "This is beautiful," she said, in a tone that suggested she was calculating square footage. Within 36 hours, she had rearranged the furniture in the main sitting room. I came in from the workshop Friday morning, and the room was wrong. I stood in the doorway for a moment, before I understood what had changed. The reading chair, a leather club chair I'd bought at an estate sale in Harrodsburg 7 years ago, the one that had taken me 3 weekends to recondition, had been moved from its position by the window to an angled spot near the television that made no structural sense and faced nothing of interest. "Gloria," I said, finding her in the kitchen. "Did you move the furniture?" "I did," she beamed at me. "The flow in there was all wrong. This opens it up so much better. It's my house." "Oh, I know. I just thought since we're going to be here a while, I might as well make it more livable." Hank looked up from his newspaper. "Gloria." She ignored him and started talking about area rugs. I moved the chair back. She moved it again 2 days later while I was at the lumber yard in Corbin picking up hardwood for a project. I moved it back. We did this 4 times before I decided that the chair was not the actual battle I needed to fight and saved my energy for the one that was coming. The cameras, meanwhile, were working fine. The first real alarm came 11 days in. I was in the workshop at 6:40 in the morning, doing the finish sanding on a walnut side table I'd been building for the past month, when my phone buzzed. Kitchen. Motion. I wiped my hands on my shop apron and opened the app. Gloria was on the phone at my kitchen counter, standing with her back to the window, speaking low. I turned up the audio. More room than I expected. The workshop alone, Trav. I mean, it's a separate building. And there's that third outbuilding by the garage that they're not using for anything. A pause. She was listening. "Hank is doing better than he has in years. The air out here, the quiet. I'm telling you, if we handle this right, I think this becomes something more permanent. Curtis is checked out in that workshop 8 hours a day. Half the time neither of them is even in the house." Another pause. "Elaine is the soft one. Work on her end and it'll come around." I set the phone on the workbench. I sat there for a moment with the sander in my hand and the walnut dust settling around me. Handle this right. More permanent. Elaine is the soft one. I went inside, poured a fresh cup of coffee, and said good morning to Gloria with a pleasantness that I imagine should have alarmed her, but did not. I asked Hank if he needed anything for his back. I made small talk about the weather forecast. I was so entirely calm that I later wondered if some part of me had been waiting for exactly this. I texted Dennis that evening. "You'll want to hear what I've got already." He wrote back, "Keep it all, label it with dates." I did. By week 3, I understood the shape of what was happening. Travis visited more often than felt casual. Twice in 1 week, then again 3 days later, always in the afternoon, when he knew I'd be in the workshop. He and Gloria had long conversations on the back porch that they clearly believed were private. The porch camera had excellent audio, what I learned across those sessions. Gloria had already decided this arrangement was indefinite. Travis had told her Elaine and I weren't opposed to something longer term, a characterization that bore no resemblance to any conversation that had actually occurred. Hank, in a conversation with Gloria I caught on the 8th day, said he thought they'd said 4 months. Gloria told him to stop being rigid. Hank said something under his breath and went inside. I was developing a real appreciation for Hank. One evening I was sitting by the creek. The light was going orange through the trees. That last hour light that makes everything look like it was designed to be beautiful. Hank came down the bank and lowered himself carefully into the other camp chair. We sat without talking for a while. Then he said, "I want you to know I didn't sign up for this, the way it's playing out." "I know," I said. "Gloria has a way of deciding things are settled before they've been discussed." "Travis is the same way," I said. He looked at the water. "Gets it from her side." He said it without any particular emotion. The observation of a man who had spent a long time living with something he'd long since catalogued. I said, "Hank, I need to ask you something directly. Did Travis tell you that Elaine and I were open to a long-term arrangement?" A pause long enough to be its own answer. "He said you were warming up to the idea." There it was, clean and clear as creek water. "We weren't," I said. "We aren't." Hank nodded once slowly, the way a man nods when something he suspected has been confirmed. "I'm sorry, Curtis. For whatever that's worth." "More than you know," I said honestly. We sat there until the light was gone. Then we went back inside for supper, and neither of us mentioned it again that night. There was nothing more to say until there was something to do. The moment everything cracked open came on a Saturday morning in week 6. Elaine and I had driven into London to pick up a birthday gift for Piper and grab lunch at a place we liked on Main Street. I was finishing my sandwich when my phone lit up. Living room, motion. I opened the app. Travis was in my house. He'd let himself in with a key he had no legitimate claim to, a key that lived on the hook by the mudroom door, and that Gloria had apparently taken at some point and passed along to her son. He was walking through my sitting room with a yellow legal pad and a tape measure, and Gloria was behind him, gesturing. "If you take out this wall here, this whole side opens up. It wouldn't even be load-bearing." Travis was making notes on the legal pad. Then a third voice, Margot's. "Travis, what are you doing?" It was not a question. It was the voice. It was the voice of someone who had just walked into a room and understood immediately that they were not going to like what they found there. "We're just looking at the possibilities." In my parents' house. There. Not here. That doesn't make it okay. I watched my daughter stand in my living room, arms crossed, looking at her husband with an expression I recognized. It was the expression Elaine gets when she's done processing something and has arrived at a conclusion that is not going to change. Elaine was next to me in the booth. "Everything okay?" she asked. "Not even a little," I said. "We need to go home. I want to tell you I drove home in a rage." That would be the version people want, I think. The righteous boil-over. The moment where Curtis Harlan puts his truck in park and comes through that front door like a thunderstorm. That's not what happened. What happened was I turned onto the gravel drive, saw Travis's truck and recognized it had been there a while, and felt something settle in my chest. Not anger. Anger burns and disperses. This was something slower and more structural, the kind of thing that has been building in the framework of a situation for 6 weeks and has just finished loading. I walked in, through the mudroom. Travis heard me and turned around with the tape measure still in his hand. For a fraction of a second his face was pure caught. Then the professional composure came back like a shade dropping. "Curtis, hey, we were just sit down," I said. Not loud. I didn't need loud. We sat at the kitchen table. All of us, Travis, Gloria, Margot, me, and Elaine, who had come in quietly behind me and was reading the room the way she's read every room for 34 years. "I have something for everyone to hear," I said. I pulled out my phone. I opened the app. I played Gloria's kitchen phone call from week 2. The room had a quality of silence after that I don't quite have words for. Not the silence of people being quiet, but the silence of people absorbing something they cannot immediately process. Gloria's face moved through several expressions rapidly. "That's..." Travis started. "Legal," I said. "One-party consent, my residence." Dennis walked me through the specifics before the system went in. "You've been recording us this whole time." Gloria's voice had a sharp edge to it that she was working to control. I've been documenting my own home, I said. Something I began doing after I was told 4 to 5 months, and then watched my kitchen being used to plan something significantly longer. Margot was looking at Travis. I know my daughter. That look meant she was doing arithmetic in her head, and the numbers were not coming out in his favor. Trav, she said quietly, did you tell them we were open to something permanent? It wasn't like that. It was more of a yes or no. His jaw tightened. That was its own answer. And what you said to me, Margot continued, about me being stressed, about our marriage, about Piper Margot, did you use that to pressure my dad? The kitchen was very quiet. You used me, she said. Not loud. Worse than loud. Then I told them the rest. I played the tape measure conversation. I told them about the key that lived on my hook, that Gloria had apparently treated as a lending library item and passed to her son without a word to me. I told them what Hank had confirmed on the creek bank, that Travis had told his parents Elaine and I were warming to a long-term arrangement, a statement with no basis in anything that had actually been said in my presence. I didn't raise my voice once. I watched Travis try to redirect, soften, reframe. He's good at it. Years of commercial lending will develop that in a person. But there is no reframe that works when the other person has the original audio. At some point, Gloria said, I think you're being very cold about this, Curtis. I said, Gloria, you stood at my kitchen counter and called my home something more permanent on a phone call you thought was private, and told your son that my wife is the soft one and to work on her. So I want to be careful about who's bringing cold into this room. Hank had come in at some point and was standing in the doorway to the hall. He didn't say anything. He looked at me once and gave the smallest nod. Not agreement. Recognition. The nod of a man watching a situation land exactly where it deserved to land. You have 2 weeks, I said. That's fair. It gives you time to make arrangements, and it's more than the conversation warrants. Travis said, You can't be serious. I am almost never not serious, I said, and I'm significantly more serious about this than I am about most things. This is family, Gloria said. Yes, I said. And family doesn't walk into a person's home with a tape measure and a legal pad, plan which walls to remove, and use an unguarded key that was never offered to them. That's not family, Gloria. That's a land grab. The next 2 weeks were not easy. Travis tried 3 approaches. First, he appealed directly to Margot, who told him she needed space to think. Second, he came back to the property alone on a Thursday and attempted to reconstruct the conversation in a way that reframed his behavior as well-intentioned enthusiasm. I listened to the whole thing without interrupting and then said, Travis, I have all of it on audio. Every conversation on that back porch, every kitchen call. You can tell me what you meant by it, that's fine. But I know what was said. He didn't come back after that. Third, and this was the one I'll admit took some skill, he approached Elaine while I was in the workshop, sat at the kitchen table with her, just the 2 of them, and walked her through a carefully built argument that my refusal to allow a longer arrangement was really a statement about how I felt about his family, and by extension, about Margot's marriage, and by extension, about Piper's home stability. Elaine had, by this point, watched every recording herself, all of them, including the back porch sessions, including the part where Gloria described her as the soft one. Travis, she said, I've heard the recordings. He stopped. All of them, she said, including the part where your mother told you I was the easier target. She stood up. I think you should go. I never told her what to say. I didn't have to. Margot came out alone on day 11. She drove out in the evening, after Piper was with Travis for the night, and we sat on the porch after supper and watched the last of the light leave the creek bottom. I didn't know, she said, about any of the long-term stuff, about what he said to get you to agree. I want you to know that. I know you didn't, I said. I'm angry at him. That's between me and Travis. Are you angry at me? I looked at my daughter. I thought about her at 5 years old in rain boots, tromping through every puddle in the driveway and laughing like it was the funniest thing that had ever happened. I thought about her at 19, calling me from a college parking lot because she'd gotten a flat tire in the rain and wanted to talk through it, even though she already knew how to change it. I thought about the look on her face in my kitchen when she'd said, You used me to her husband. No, I said. Not at you. Not even a little. She leaned her head on my shoulder. We sat there a long time. Dad, she said after a while, I think I need to have some conversations. I think that's the right call, I said. Moving day was a Tuesday. I was in the workshop, doing a dry fit on a cherry writing desk. I'd started 2 weeks earlier when Hank knocked on the open door. He came in and looked around at the equipment, the organized tool wall, the pieces laid out on the assembly table. Nice shop, he said. Thanks, I said. It's the reason I bought the property. He nodded, stood there a moment. Then he held out his hand. I owe you an apology, Curtis. A real one. Hank, let me say it. I knew something was off in the framing of this from the beginning. I let Gloria manage it because arguing with Gloria requires energy I didn't have, and that was the coward's calculation. He paused. I knew what 4 months meant when Travis said it, and I knew when the goalposts started moving and I kept quiet. That's on me. Your back was bad, I said. My back's always bad. That's not a reason to let someone else get fleeced. I shook his hand. You're decent, Hank. He made a sound that might have been a laugh. Don't let that get around. Gloria walked past the workshop without stopping. She had the expression of a woman filing something away under grievances to be addressed at a future date. I filed one right back. Travis came last. He stood at the workshop door, not the porch, the workshop which told me he at least understood enough not to come into my house again uninvited, with his keys in his hand. I hope, he said, that we can move past this. I set down the hand plane I was holding. Travis, I said, you came into my home with a measuring tape to plan structural renovations. You had your mother take a key from my own mudroom hook without asking. You told your parents that Elaine and I were open to a permanent arrangement when no such conversation had occurred, and then you sat across from me and used my daughter's well-being and my granddaughter's stability as leverage to keep me from saying no, and when none of it worked, you went to my wife and tried to do it again. He didn't say anything. So here's where we are, I said. Everything is documented. Every conversation on that porch. Every call from my kitchen. Every word. If there is ever another attempt to manage, maneuver, or manipulate this family for your benefit, through Margot, through Elaine, through Piper, through anyone, those recordings become relevant to every conversation that follows. Are we clear? His face did something I hadn't seen before. Not anger. Not the smooth professional redirect. Something quieter. The look of a man who has spent 3 years operating on the assumption that a quiet, retired father-in-law was scenery, and is understanding now, too late, that he was badly wrong about that. Yeah, he said. We're clear. Good drive safe. They were gone by noon. Elaine came out to the workshop after. She brought 2 mugs of coffee. The good stuff. The Guatemala blend she keeps in the top cabinet for days that earn it. She handed me one and leaned against the workbench. You know, she said, when you started moving things into the gun safe, I thought you were catastrophizing. I know. I was wrong. You were optimistic, I said. It's different. She looked around the shop, at the cherry desk taking shape on the assembly table, at the walnut side table that had gotten its last coat of finish the week before, at the tools on the wall that were exactly where I'd put them and had remained there. So what now? She said. Now we have our home back, I said, and I finished this desk. She looked at the desk frame, the joinery, the careful work of the last few weeks. It's beautiful, she said. It'll be better when it's done. She laughed, the real laugh, not the company one, the involuntary, surprise-sounding one that has been my favorite thing in the world for 34 years. We stood in the workshop with our good coffee until the mugs were empty. 7 weeks later, Margot filed for a separation. I won't pretend that didn't sit heavy. A marriage ending, even one that had been quietly breaking for longer than anyone admitted, is not a moment to feel satisfied about. Margot was in pain. That was the only thing that mattered. But the following weekend she drove out with Piper, and Piper made a beeline for the creek the moment the car stopped. And Margot sat on the porch with Elaine and a glass of iced tea. And let the quiet do what the quiet doubt here. And after a while she came out to the workshop and leaned in the doorway and watched me work. Dad, she said.
How did you know?
I thought about the smile before the sentences ended. The tape measure, the key on the hook, the way Gloria had touched the curtains on arrival day, like she was checking inventory she'd already decided to keep. I paid attention, I said. She shook her head. You were 3 steps ahead the whole time. 1 step, I said. Just consistently. Piper came running up from the creek, mud on both boots, completely certain that neither Margot nor I would have any objection to this. She was right. I set down the hand plane and caught her before she could transfer the mud to anything finished. Out past the tree line, a red-tailed hawk lifted off from a high branch, crossed the open sky above the creek bottom, and was gone. I don't think much about Travis anymore. Last I heard, through Margot, through Hank, who calls her sometimes on his own, he'd taken a position with a different lending firm in Cincinnati and was renting a place there. Nobody passed that along to me directly. I don't require the update. What I think about sometimes, when I'm in the workshop in the early morning with the coffee going and the light just starting through the high windows, is this. There's a certain kind of person who looks at a man who's worked hard his whole life and finally stepped back into something quiet and sees a soft target, sees someone who's tired, who wants peace, who'll absorb a push rather than create friction. What they don't account for, because quiet people don't advertise it, is that the quiet isn't surrender, it's clarity. It's the accumulated patience of someone who has spent 41 years knowing the difference between a fight worth having and one that needs to be documented first. The workshop is exactly as I arranged it. The reading chair is exactly where it belongs. The 11 acres are exactly as quiet as they were designed to be. Elaine made her good potato salad last Sunday, and we ate it on the covered porch while Piper chased fireflies through the yard, and the creek moved over its stones at the back of the property, and nothing was measured that didn't belong to me. Retirement, it turns out, is still the reward. You just have to know when to install the cameras.